on it. He thanks her for the kind gesture. The moment the sugary treat touches his tongue, his blue companion appears on his shoulder, expressing utter delight at the taste and flavor of the cake. With the way his eyes pop out, one would assume he's in love with the ice cream, because he starts to lose all self-control and begins yapping about how it's just as good as the first time he had it, so he immediately urges our hero to eat the 2 remaining pieces as well. Leon sees his blue friend's misbehavior and points out that Lunan decided to share the treats even though she really likes them too, so he tells him to calm down and stop being immature. After scolding the spirit, our MC closes the box of treats while Lunan is still holding it, and he thanks her again for it, admitting that it was really good too. However, the white-haired girl almost seems disappointed that he only had one of the sweet treats, and she just stares at his hand on top of the box before finally asking him if he doesn't want any more. Once again, our blonde hero assures her that one is enough for him, and he thanks her too. So, with a very concerned look on her face, she asks him if he feels better now, but it appears that the question takes him off guard. Leon manages to shake the shock off his face and lets out a sigh while telling her that he feels much better. Of course, the caring girl is pleased to hear this, and she expresses her relief that she managed to cheer him up. And while she's smiling at him, her big purple eyes do the same too. Satisfied that she made him feel better, Lunan turns around to leave with her box of treats, and while she's walking away, our blonde hero stares at her with a smile etched on his face, thinking about what a mysterious kid she is. The scene shifts, and we see the red-haired elf addressing Leon and the others while standing on a platform. He jokes about how it must have been boring for the students with all the training they've been doing lately, and so, he decides to spark things up a bit by preparing something special for the next month. Since they've trained their basics and training techniques, he believes that it's about time they moved on to their energy cores and started training in that regard. But while he's saying all of this, the students don't seem to have any idea what energy cores are all about. Perplexed, they all start to murmur among themselves, wondering what on earth the elf is talking about. The instructor notices their confusion, so he smiles, before revealing that they'll proceed with duels in a month. While the others seem unsure about the whole arrangement, a certain dark-haired girl seems to be excited by the prospects, because the smile on her face is unusually wide. The red-haired elf continues addressing them, and informs them that the results of the duels will affect their graduation status, and that they would also be ranked accordingly. He's still talking and encouraging them to prepare thoroughly for the month ahead, when he's interrupted by someone who raises his hand, and simply tells him to wait. We finally get to see the person's face, and find out that it's the dark-haired girl who was smiling earlier. With her hand still raised, she asks him what would happen to the students like her friend, who are falling behind and haven't yet been able to create their aura. All the others turn to look at her in shock, and then the instructor informs her that he heard that her friend actually succeeded in the end. As it turns out, she wasn't aware, and with a surprised look, she faces Leon to confirm what the elf is saying. Realizing that he's not pulling her legs, another wide smile appears on Martha's face, because now she believes that there are finally opportunities. She reveals that she almost died of boredom because of how long the training went on, and as she walks closer to Leon, she reminds him of what she said before about how she doesn't listen to guys who are weaker than her. However, now that she knows he passed the training, she's starting to think that she's been patient with him for long enough. The blonde kid looks like he's already tired of listening to her, but he just stands there and stares at her with his red eyes. At this point, she's trying to get on his nerves on purpose, because she starts suggesting that he must have struggled a lot because he's in a position that he's not qualified to be in. With this in mind, she tells him that she's going to teach him a lesson, but just when she's about to get even closer to him, someone places a hand in her way, and tells her to back off. The blocker is none other than Burin, and reminds her that it hasn't even been a single day since Leon got his aura. He continues to scold her, pointing out that the duels are in a month, and even questions her honor as a swordsman for wanting to confront the hero at this time. Of course, Martha gets offended by his sharp words, but she manages to keep her cool so she can calmly throw some shade at the young master. She places a hand on his shoulder, and teases him for taking honor so seriously, and suggests it's because he grew up so treasured. And then, she gives him a reality check by informing him that where she comes from, honor is reserved for people who deserve it. Burin tries to hit back with some remarks of his own, but she doesn't give him the chance because she immediately starts walking away. And while she does, she points out how even the average students learned how to use aura within a month, and yet their top trainee took over 6 months to do the same. Martha goes on to explain that even advanced techniques take 7 months to learn on average, so if Leon is taking that long to learn only the basics, then it means that he isn't talented at all. At this point, Burin is pretty annoyed, but he can't say anything to defend our hero, so he just stands there speechlessly, while Martha mocks him some more for being present during the judgment ceremony. It turns out that the reason for the humiliation is the fact that a swordsman who has not learned aura can never become famous, because there's no point in being talented if you can't master the basics. After lambasting our hero and Burn, Martha turns to the instructor to suggest that the reason he came up with the whole idea of duels is because he wants to change the top student at the moment. But upon receiving the mild accusation, the guilty-looking elf just feigns ignorance, claiming that he doesn't know. When the red-haired elf denies the allegation, Martha immediately turns to face Leon again and bluntly tells him that he's been the top student for too long, even though he doesn't deserve it. So, with this idea in her head, she tells him that it's time he stepped down from the position. Our hero doesn't say anything in response, so once again, she challenges him to a duel, where the winner would become the new top student. But before she can finish talking, Leon cuts her off with a very loud and clear no. His response takes her by surprise, and she finds it hard to hide the look of disbelief on her face. Finally, our quiet hero decides to respond to the annoying girl, and he starts by asking her if she thinks she can gamble without having any money. And then, he makes it clear to her that she has to offer something of equal value if she wants to bet on his position as top student. Even though she didn't expect him to defend his title, she taunts him some more to get on his nerves, reminding him that in his current situation, nobody around is on his side. Martha attempts to use her words to trick him into accepting her sham deal, but our boy cuts her off once more. And this time, it really gets to her because he suddenly asks her if she's scared to put something of value on the line as well. You know when someone is so mad that they just smile at first, instead of flipping out. Well, that's what happens to Martha when she hears Leon ask her that question. With a creepy smile on her face, she asks him if he seriously just said that to her. And then, in an instant, she starts laughing hysterically, claiming that she finds the conversation very amusing. She eventually stops laughing like a maniac, and after catching her breath, she arrogantly tells our boy that she'll tolerate his question because she understands that he doesn't want to bet on nothing. Desperate to get him to accept her challenge, Martha reluctantly presents the Calamity Orb, which turns out to be the miracle medicine that her father gave her. This white ball in a box helps strengthen her body and aura, so clearly it has a lot of value to her. As the challenger, she waves the box in front of Leon's face, vowing to give it to him if he wins the duel. She asks him what he thinks about the offer, suggesting that it's not a bad prize to win. And in that brief moment when our boy is considering it, his blue companion, Wrath, pops out again to also have a look at the Calamity Orb. Our boy reminds the spirit about how he planned to wait for the perfect time to screw Martha over, but Wrath doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. So of course, Leon explains that there's something he wants to get from the mean girl, and with a knowing smirk on his face, he claims that this is their chance to do it because now is the perfect time. Unfortunately, we don't get to see what our genius hero planned right away, because the scene shifts to a month later. And in this scene, we see the anxious challenger looking at her calendar, because it's already been a month since she convinced our hero to accept her challenge. Martha is very excited about the duel, feeling that she finally has her chance to get payback on him. You see, Martha had never been hit in a fight by someone her age before coming to the training grounds. But Leon ended her streak with ease. And so, after 8 months, she finally wants to pay him back for the shame he caused her back then. She continues to think deeply about how the fight could go, and she recalls that it's only been a month since he learned how to use aura, which makes her feel very confident that she'll win. After all, she's already trained in her art for more than 3 years, so a mere noob shouldn't even stand a chance. However, another thought suddenly flashes across her mind, and she starts to believe that it's also a waste of time to wait for someone as untalented as him. Martha reminds herself that she needs to get stronger, especially because there's someone she needs to save. And with this motivation, she declares that Leon Zygarde is about to meet his end. Meanwhile, elsewhere, we see our boy chilling with Wrath, oblivious to the fact that Martha is seriously plotting her revenge on him. The scene shifts once again, and we see the instructor addressing the students concerning the duels. He starts by requesting their attention, before talking about how watching a fight is usually as helpful as participating in one. So, he advises them to watch closely how the other trainees fight against their opponents, and urges them to think about how they would react in certain situations. The instructor appears to be very excited about the duels, but the same cannot be said for the students, because they're all standing still like statues. Of course, he notices this and senses the tension, so he encourages them to shake off the nerves and just do their best. After the little pep talk, the red-haired elf reveals the matchup, which happens to be between Burin and another trainee named Dorian. Hearing his name, the young blue-haired master acknowledges the call-up and immediately steps forward for the fight. But while he's bravely stepping up to the challenge, his opponent doesn't seem to share the same enthusiasm. In fact, the terrified kid with green hair, who happens to be Dorian, fearfully raises his hand to call the instructor's attention and timidly surrenders before the fight even begins. As you'd expect, Burin is instantly taken aback when he hears this, to the point that he's even dumbfounded. The instructor, on the other hand, manages to shake off the wave of shock and points out to Dorian that the fight hasn't even started. Determined to get out of fighting Burin in a duel, Dorian suddenly holds his tummy and begins wincing in pain, claiming that he doesn't feel so good and that he has been feeling weak since the previous day. The instructor just looks down at the green-haired kid, who's insisting that he's serious about his condition. But it's quite clear that he's faking it. As Dorian continues his display, Wrath looks at him with rage and irritation laced all over his face, because he knows that if he had someone like that as his subordinate, he would probably decapitate him on the spot for being so pathetic. But surprisingly, Leon claims that he already expected something like this to happen. Meanwhile, the gentle instructor tries to convince Dorian to at least try, by assuring him that he would learn something even if he loses the fight. I'm not sure how, but his pep talk actually works because the kid agrees to give it a try. However, what we see in the next scene shows us that Dorian quickly regrets his decision. It doesn't take long before the green-haired kid loses to Burin and collapses to the floor, so he immediately surrenders once again. After the fight, the concerned instructor tells Burin that he's still failing to control his emotions, and points out that he could have defeated Dorian with only 5 moves if he had his feelings in check. The brooding kid defends himself by claiming that Dorian's reactions made him upset. Hearing this, the elf lets the matter go and faces the green-haired kid to ask him why he keeps running away, pointing out that he could have endured longer if only he fought properly. Unfortunately, all of the encouragement goes to waste because the kid just ignores him and keeps lying there like a loser while admitting that he's just too scared. After that display, the elf becomes excited again because he's about to announce the fighters for the next match. So, with a wide smile on his face, he calls out Lunan and Crane to come forward. Unlike the previous matchup, these 2 trainees are in it to win it, and just by looking at Crane's stern expression when they take the stage, you can tell just how serious he is. Lunan doesn't look so desperate to win though. In fact, she looks like she's bored. The 2 fighters take their battle stance, so the instructor starts the duel without any further delay. As soon as the fight starts, Crane charges at Lunan, attempting to quickly land a lethal hit. But even with how aggressive his attack is, the white-haired girl sees it coming, and just effortlessly deflects it with her sword. Sure enough, Crane is shocked to see this, and as his weapon gets knocked out of his hand and lodged into the ground, the instructor stops the duel. He then tells Crane that he's way too nervous, and explains that he needs to be more relaxed when wielding a sword. On the other hand, he tells Lunan that she didn't use aura enough, even though he admits that her counterattack was very good. After hearing what the instructor has to say, the 2 fighters acknowledge his advice and take note of it, so he proceeds to call out the next 2 trainees. The battles go on for a while, and among the sounds of the freshly clashing swords, the trainees start to comment that Martha must be getting really impatient for having to wait until the last turn. That's right, the duel between the black-haired girl and our blonde hero was finally in full swing, and it looked like Martha was having a real fun time in the fight. We see the look of pure confidence on her face as usual, and she's very excited as she clashes swords with our hero, who looks quite serious as well. I mean, this is a high-stakes match after all, so it's no surprise that both of them are dialed in. As the fight continues, Martha attempts to land devastating blows, but each time, our boy deflects them, showing incredible agility and skill. And it doesn't take long before he turns defense into offense, with a brilliant counterattack move that leaves the girl shocked. However, she manages to dodge the hit, and then goes back to reassess the situation before her. Even though she's starting to get worried, she covers it up with her usual taunting facade. She tells Leon that she didn't think he could deflect her sword, and finally admits that he's actually talented after all. Regardless, she believes that his talent is only in his swordsmanship, so she calls him a halfling whose aura isn't strong enough, and as such, she claims that he doesn't have a future. As usual, her words are just a distraction to allow her to land an attack, so while she's saying these mean things, she also prepares to go in for another attack. This time, it's much more powerful than the previous ones, because she leaps into the air and generates an insane amount of momentum in a single swing, hoping to finish our hero off with the hit. However, to her surprise, Leon blocks the attack and continues to stand his ground, even as she tries to force him down. Despite her surprise that our hero managed to block it, the girl taunts him, suggesting that he can't hold it much longer, because aura depends a lot more on the talent of the user than their swordsmanship. Determined to throw him off his game, Martha tells him that someone like him who just barely managed to create aura can never be her match in a million years. She even threatens to crush his bones if he doesn't surrender, but before she can complete her threats, our boy deflects her attack and forces her back a few feet. At this point, the mean girl is stunned, and Leon finally decides to use his words to fight back, so he points out how she keeps talking about talent, and how the people in their family really love this word. Martha responds, suggesting it must be annoying for him to hear it all the time, because he's not talented, which is also the reason she wants him to realize his actual place. Hearing this, our hero hits back at her, revealing that he's going to show her something as well, and this thing in question happens to be something way more important than simple talent. The moment Leon says this, his sword is instantly covered in flames, and upon seeing this, fear and anxiety grip the boastful challenger. Scared and confused, she stares at our boy as he reveals the Thousand Flames technique, first flames, which he's going to use to teach her a lesson. Martha is stunned to see this, and starts to wonder what the flames are and why they're on his sword. Even though she has no idea what made them, what she's sure of is the fact that those flames are by no means ordinary, and they are most certainly very dangerous. Despite her fear, she notices that there is a very strong intent behind Leon's flames, which makes it possible for them to feel so alive. Martha refuses to back down even if she's at a disadvantage, so she musters all the courage she can and grips her sword, preparing to go in for another round. In other words, she's going to reveal a powerful secret technique of her own as well. And while our hero's sword is covered in flames, Martha activates her technique called Meteor Form, Ultimate Point. That's right, this duel just got more intense, because Leon immediately realizes that Ultimate Point is a skill that allows her to collect all of her aura into a single point, and he's impressed that she can use such a skill at her age. Our boy also presumes that she's going to throw everything into her next attack, but he still remains calm and waits to see what exactly she's going to do. The two opponents face off once again, and Martha admits that our hero is strong, but she assures him that he won't be able to block the next attack she throws at him. Just like she did earlier, she lifts into the air and generates a lot of force, which she concentrates into her aura-infused sword attack. Leon watches closely with his eyes fixed on the girl while she's in the air, and so when she finally lands her most powerful attack yet, history repeats itself and our hero blocks it just like he did the first time. You can tell just how power-packed this clash is, just by looking at the air around the two fighters. It's filled with their aura, which is probably a result of the insanely powerful techniques they are using. The other trainees watching are probably scared at this point, because the force from Martha's attack cracked the ground, while also causing a huge dust cloud to emerge. They find it hard to see what's happening because of this, but when the dust clears, we see that the challenger's sword was broken in the clash. And on top of that, she's been knocked out cold, lying on the cracked floor. Upon seeing this, the other students can't believe their eyes, because they never expected that Leon would defeat her, and they certainly didn't expect Martha to lose the fight she's been training so hard for. Either way, they notice something strange about our hero's aura as well, and murmur about what it could be. Leon hears all of their comments, but like the quiet guy he is, he ultimately decides to ignore them without clearing anything up. He stands over his opponent's body while rubbing his wrist, and just looks down at the girl, not sure of what to say at this point. Suddenly, he notices that even in Martha's unconscious state, her fist is still tightly wrapped around her sword. And seeing such resolve, Leon admits that in the end, the black-haired girl also has something far better than some flimsy talent or skill. This special quality that he believes she possesses is mental strength, and he seems to be very impressed by it. This story never disappoints with its progression, and I can't wait to see the look on Martha's face when she wakes up. Will she be able to reconcile with our hero and change her personality? Or will she simply fall into a state of denial and make things even more awkward? Also, who is the person she's actually trying to save by aiming to get stronger? The scene changes, and the next thing we see is the palace, where the patriarch is being informed that Leon has defeated Martha. The red-haired elf is the one breaking the news to him, and he points out how our boy completely defeated Martha, even though she's been training her aura for more than 4 years. Overall, the instructor summarizes the event as an unbelievable feat, and it turns out that the man sitting on his throne feels the same way. He admits that the flames he saw that day were beautiful, and the force of the powerful move was incomparable to its size. Not to mention, he's almost completely certain that everyone in the family is already aware of the situation. With this in mind, he tells the instructor to guide the hero so that he doesn't get full of himself, and of course, the elf is more than pleased to perform his duty. But even though the patriarch is very impressed with his son's feat, he's also very concerned about Martha, who had to suffer a crushing defeat, so he asks how she's holding up. Her instructor admits that the girl was a bit shocked at first, but also confirms that her injuries are completely treatable. While they're still discussing, we see that the girl in question is still brooding in her room after her loss. Her injuries might be minor, but it looks like the emotional damage isn't something they can ignore. Outside, we see our blonde hero trying out something with a beautiful flower in the garden. But while he's at it, his blue companion yells at him not to hurt the flower, and even threatens to freeze him to death if he doesn't do better. In response, Leon bluntly tells Wrath that the flower won't even do anything, and then tells the blue creature to stop acting like he's so strong. However, Wrath insists that their plan isn't working because of the kid's stupid elemental resistance, so Leon smugly hits back, saying that he's glad the blue creature is aware that this isn't worth trying. The scene suddenly shifts to the night after Martha's defeat, and we see that our boy receives the miracle medicine he won from the bet. It turns out that the substance greatly increased his stats. His fourth ring of fire was formed as well, which greatly increases his strength, stamina, and agility. On top of that, his decreased athleticism and mana sensitivity vanished. His legendary senses also increased and became 2-star proficiency. Overall, Leon feels that all of the efforts until now just took effect because of the miracle medicine. A lot of things were improved, but the most significant thing was his water resistance, which was increased to 4 stars. Because of this new upgrade, most of Wrath's outbursts had become more like jokes to him. Either way, we learn that he came to the garden since it's his last day of rest, and while he's tending to the flower we saw earlier, Wrath continues to rant and yell at him, while insisting that he knows the best way for Leon to do it. However, just like our boy said earlier, all of the blue creature's outbursts have become more like jokes to him, so he just ignores him and wonders why he even has to deal with his annoying lectures while gardening. Of course, Wrath doesn't stop trying to control him, so while he's demanding that Leon use his hands to work, the blonde hero starts to actually wonder how the magical creature knows so much about gardening anyway. His thoughts are interrupted when Wrath suddenly answers him, by revealing that he used to fill the gardens with ice flowers when he was in the demon realm. The blue guy goes on to praise himself, claiming that the demons even used to revere him for his skills, but while he's still bragging, Leon gets distracted. The cause of the distraction turns out to be Martha, who just entered the garden with a scowl etched on her face. Our hero gets a bit uncomfortable when he sees her, and it gets even more tense when she just stares at him without saying a word. Seeing this, Leon breaks the silence by asking her why she's come, since he knows she didn't come to fight him. However, she stays mute, and it makes him wonder if she's not as mature as he thought. He thinks to himself about how childish she's being, but he tries to shake off the thought so he doesn't upset her even more. That's about the same time she finally reveals that the reason she's come is to challenge him to another fight, and in response, our boy simply admits that it's a pity she still hasn't accepted her loss. But the girl quickly counters him, insisting that she has acknowledged her loss. However, she claims that she doesn't understand how she lost in the first place, so she's come back to him to find out. When she's done making her point, Leon asks her what he would get in return if he fights her, which takes the challenger off guard. Seeing her shock, he informs her that it's customary for the loser to at least bring a gift when coming to challenge the winner. But while he's still trying to educate her, she cuts him off, stating that it's nonsense because it's not like he needs payment to fight her. Unfortunately for Martha, our boy is ready to go very low in this conversation, so he informs her that he requires payment. At this point, she starts to panic because she fears that Leon doesn't even want to fight. Desperate to get him riled up, she decides that stepping on the flowers would do the trick. So, she tauntingly tries to stomp on the flowers, but our boy simply reveals that he doesn't care about the plants. Bro claims that he doesn't even like flowers anyway, and says that he doesn't understand why most people adore them either. Martha is stunned when she hears him say this, and Leon concludes his little confession by revealing that he's only gardening for his mom's sake. Seeing his nonchalance about the whole situation, the challenger gets pissed off. She hisses in annoyance, and decides to spare the innocent flowers since she knows that destroying them would do her no good. Afterward, she sighs angrily and tells him that she's leaving before storming out of the garden. Just when Martha leaves the scene, Leon's mother appears, calling out to him and informing that she's been looking all over for him. The worried mother was wondering where he was, and our boy was kind of surprised to see her. However, that's not the main issue on ground at the moment, because it turns out that she saw Martha with him and has now become very curious about her son's friend. She's really excited to see Leon finally hanging out with people his age, so she almost instantly concludes that Martha is a friend he made while training. Meanwhile, the girl in question, who hasn't completely left the garden, hears the voice and turns around to look at the person. She sees Leon's mother and wonders if she's Sylvia Sieghart, the person who left the family to chase after a man, and then came back to save her own child. Martha sees her as someone who acted out of courage for the sake of her own child, and while she's still thinking, the blonde woman in question approaches her. She notices the black hair of the girl she had seen earlier and expresses her happiness at finally getting to meet her. Leon, on the other hand, isn't so excited about the introduction, so he murmurs something about how nobody likes Martha and how they aren't really friends. Our boy tries to make his mom go inside, but she's just excited to meet her son's friend. She engages Martha in conversation, asking her if she got hurt during the duel. As you'd expect, the girl is taken aback by the mother's concern, but she manages to tell her that she's okay. Sylvia reveals that she was really worried and starts to smother the girl with affection, telling her that she didn't know Daniel brought up such a talented and beautiful child. And because of this, Martha starts to blush uncontrollably, not knowing how to react to the kindness. Either way, the woman finally asks her what brings her around, so the black-haired girl shyly reveals that she just had something to tell our hero. A very flustered Martha tries to cut the conversation short by claiming that she's done and wants to get going. But Leon's mother suddenly insists that she stay over and have a meal with them. This offer shocks the girl to her bones, and while she's still in a daze, Sylvia takes her hand and insists that she can't let her son's friend leave on an empty stomach. Of course, Martha tries to protest, but all of efforts prove futile because the next thing we see is the two kids sitting at a table while Sylvia serves the food. Leon is utterly confused by his mother's politeness and a bit embarrassed by the way she talks about the food he likes. When Sylvia sits at the table, she tries to make small talk with Martha. She confirms that the girl is a year older than Leon and then asks her if she had faced any troubles during training. The girl claims that she's fine in that department, so the lady goes on to talk about how the meat might be a bit tougher than she's used to. As a result, she asks Martha to chew well so she doesn't get indigestion, and the moment the girl hears this, she literally sees her mother and Sylvia for a brief moment. The flashback of Martha's childhood with her mother is brief, but it hits really hard. She continues to eat in silence, and by the time she's done with the meal, she thanks Sylvia for having her. The kind lady reveals that she's glad Martha enjoyed the meal, and then she asks the girl to be nice to Leon going forward. Meanwhile, the son in question is standing a few meters away in utter confusion, because has no idea why the hell Martha is also acting so nice all of a sudden. It makes him wonder if she ate something bad, and Raph, who's just as confused as him, suggests that it might be a possibility. Later, while walking home, Martha thinks about the meal and concludes that Leon must think she's crazy. However, Sylvia's eyes look just like her mother's, and it made it impossible for her to reject the offer. Martha thinks about how her hair color, face, and voice were all different, but despite that, she could really feel the warmth of her own mother from Sylvia. We suddenly learn that after Martha's real mother was kidnapped by the white blood cult, she was adopted by Daniel, and from that day, she vowed that she would never lose until she found her mother. Since then, she had done everything to keep that promise, but that was until she lost to Leon. Martha knows that the Zygardes adopted her for her talent, so she fears that she might get kicked out if she keeps losing. It seems that her father is a soft person, but the girl starts to wonder what would happen if it's all an act. If that's the case, then it would mean that she would lose all hope of finding her mother. This is why she is so hard on herself, because she thinks in her mind that she's never allowed to lose. When Martha gets home, she's met by a messenger who's been waiting for her, because he has a message for her from Daniel. The young lady is shocked to see the letter that her father left for her, and the messenger claims that it was probably written right after the duel. In the letter, we see her father congratulating her on her first loss, reminding her that one loss doesn't make her a loser. He encourages her to think about what made her lose, and improve on it, rather than get worked up about the defeat. In the end, he wishes that he could be there to comfort her, and apologizes for how long his mission is taking him. But he also assures her that he loves her, and that he's still looking for her mother with the best of his abilities. The note closes with him telling her to hold on, because he hasn't given up on her. After reading the note, Martha seems rather cold about it, and simply tells the messenger to inform her father that she'll keep his words in mind. The moment she enters her room, she resumes beating herself up about the loss. The girl thinks that the defeat was really pathetic, because it wasn't even a result of her letting her guard down or something. Troubled and frustrated, she stands in front of her mirror and picks up a knife, deciding that she has to acknowledge her loss and move forward. Martha insists that she can't bring shame to her father, so she cannot pretend that her defeat never happened. As such, she decides that she has to mark the event and improve upon her mistakes, and ensure that she won't be ashamed to see her father. With this in mind, she begins to cut her hair with the knife. And by the time she's done, she decides that it's time to set her mind straight, so that she can let go of her stupid and pathetic past. Martha then stares at her new appearance in the mirror, and vows that she will become stronger than ever. The next day, when she arrives at the training ground, the other students can't believe how different she looks, but she just ignores all their murmuring, and heads straight down to where Leon is sitting. Our boy is also quite shocked by her change in appearance, but she doesn't even give him a chance to ask anything before stating why she's come to see him. The young lady suddenly admits that she knows an apology won't make up for the way she's treated him in the past, but she assures him that she's going to keep her promise. As you'd expect, Leon has no idea what she's talking about, so he reluctantly asks her what she's trying to say. In response, the girl begrudgingly admits that she's talking about the deal they made before the first duel, where the loser is supposed to obey the winner. As much as it pains her to say it, she admits that it's the reason she came, and then quickly storms out of the place before her ego can take any more damage. Once she walked away from him, Leon calmly processes everything that she just said, and thinks about how random and unexpected it was. Regardless, he's quite sure that she's not going to act so docile just because of the promise, and it makes him think that she might actually have changed a lot in such a short time. As such, Leon starts to feel that Martha might actually be a lot more mature for her age. However, this conclusion gets proven wrong immediately when he sees the girl in question kicking one of the other students for getting in her way all the time. As he witnesses her kick the shit out of the green-haired weakling, he realizes that she probably only changed towards him. After that scene, the next thing we see is that the new year has arrived. Right from the start, there have been many small changes, and it's mainly because of Martha's promise. Everyone initially felt that her ego wouldn't let her keep the promise, but she proved them all wrong by actually obeying our hero. Some other changes include the fact that Byrne finally learned to be more patient with other trainees, and that Lunan was still a bit dazed out, but her sword had gotten a lot more precise. All of these changes are really good for the students, but the most important one is the fact that Leon now trains every day, so he can be ready to give his all. As you can imagine, this constant training only makes him more powerful than he already was. Some of the other students stare at him in astonishment when they see that he has already completely mastered a technique that he was taught the previous day. They start to wonder if he already knew the technique, but quickly remember that it's kind of impossible. The most baffling thing about Leon's sudden mastery is that he was just standing still with his eyes closed when the technique was being taught. As they watch him do his thing, the other students start to believe that our hero's posture might even be better than the instructor's. The elf overhears them talking about this, and after seeing Leon's technique for himself, he knows that he can't really argue about it. The scene shifts, and we see him talking to the patriarch again on top of a cliff, claiming that his son is a real monster who defies all logic. At this point, the patriarch gets a little upset that the instructor keeps talking about Leon, but the red-haired elf laughs it off, replying that he shouldn't pretend like he's not also curious about the kid. Either way, his focus turns to the compound below when he notices that the employees around the main building seem a lot busier of late, so he asks if the patriarch is preparing anything special. That's when he finds out that there are people visiting soon, and when he asks who they are, he learns that envoys from the Orwen Patriarchdom are set to arrive in a few days. The Orwen happens to be one of the 6 Emperor's 5 demons, and they are also one of the few forces that are close to the Zygardes. These guys are basically a patriarchdom of knights who prioritize the importance of swords and martial arts over everything else. Hearing this, the instructor asks who the envoy representative is going to be, and the patriarch claims that they said it would be the 3rd prince. However, he has a strong feeling it would actually be Duke Tartan. A frown appears on his face to show that he doesn't like this Tartan dude very much, and even the elf admits that he's shocked to hear that the psycho really became a duke. He also comments that the 3rd prince must be the same age as Leon or Burin, but the patriarch just plainly states that he doesn't know. He tells the instructor to ensure that the trainees are behaving, and the latter is shocked that their training halls will also be visited. That's when he's informed that the 3rd prince is coming with the patriarchdom's trainee knights, and as such, they'll want to watch the swordsman in training. So, the patriarch summarizes everything by telling the elf that they can't afford to embarrass themselves. But while he's saying all of this, the instructor is distracted by the thought of Orwen's 3rd prince being the same age as Leon and the other students. The patriarch sees the elf getting amused, and accuses him of scheming again, which the instructor doesn't even deny. Later, he rejoins his students and informs them of the new development, so they're equally shocked to hear that Orwen Knights will be coming at their training grounds. The instructor reminds them that the envoy is already on the way, and then informs them that the 3rd prince would like to spar with them. As you can imagine, the trainees get nervous because of the sudden news, but the elf insists that he's always reminded them that a swordsman should be prepared at all times, even in their sleep. The nervous students recall that the visitors were supposed to go to the 6th training hall, so they wonder why they want to visit them now. In a flashback scene, we see that the elf was actually the one who went to invite the Orwen people to come see the 5th training hall. In the present, he pretends not to know what caused the sudden change, and encourages them to look at each other before inviting the visitors inside. As the blonde prince and his knights enter the training hall, the instructor welcomes them and introduces them as the Orwen Patriarchdom's prized knights in training. The blue-eyed prince greets the teacher and introduces himself as Grier de Orwen. Meanwhile, Leon observes the prince carefully and admits that he's certainly strong for his age, because even at first glance, he can tell that he's the strongest among the other knights in training. Just then, like every forward and overconfident teacher, the instructor calls out to Leon and asks him if he's also scared to duel with the prince. Of course, our boy thinks carefully about his answer so he doesn't end up embarrassing himself. In his mind, he admits that it would be nice to practice the footstep technique he just learned, as well as connect his sword skills, so after thinking deeply, he replies that he would like to train with the visitors. The elf immediately concludes that Leon spoke for the whole class, so he decides that both sides have agreed, and proceeds to tell his students that they need to pick 20 from their side. He asks each of his trainees to lock who they would like to duel against, and as if the pressure wasn't already enough, he informs them that he's bet his entire month's salary on them winning against the visitors. The students are horrified to hear this, especially since he tells them that he'll put them through hell if they lose. A while later, we see that Leon has helped the students to pick out the best 20 among themselves, and tells them to look closely at the opponent's hands. That's when the students realize that the Orwen Knights are shaking too. Our boy tells his team that even though the visitors have handsome armor and confident posture, they're still trainees like the rest of them, who can't help but get nervous about a duel. Leon continues his pep talk, assuring the students that the intensity of their training is in no way less than that of the 6 emperors or 5 demons. He pumps them up, reminding them that the blood and sweat they've shed training until this day has been worth it, and encouraging them to do their best and not get nervous. With high spirits and a lot more confidence, they acknowledge his words, so Leon decides that he'll be picking the order in which they go in. This blonde-haired mini-commander knows that the first fighter is an important factor in increasing the spirit of others, so he decides that it must be someone strong. With this in mind, he calls Martha and asks her if she can do it. But before he finishes talking, the girl starts walking to the arena, confidently assuring him that she'll end it quickly. Martha asks everyone to gather around the center to watch, and as she takes the stage, the other students are horrified to see the huge opponent she'll be going up against. They start to wonder if these knight trainees are even the same age as them, and fear that even Martha might not be able to win. The Orwen knight in training introduces himself as Tars, and compliments her body for being so well trained, even though it's not fully matured. He then admits that he's looking forward to their duel. But while the other students worry about how the fight would go, Martha is so confident in her victory that she tells Tars to stop acting polite and just start the fight. Our girl is as feisty as ever, and it looks like she'll finally have a chance to redeem her character in this story. I've enjoyed her character development so far, and I'm now looking forward to seeing what the Orwen's third prince is going to be like. Will he end up being a stuck-up and prideful character, or will he actually have a positive attitude towards our hero? As the duel begins, the prince is shocked to see that Martha is overpowering Tars, who's actually the bigger and seemingly stronger knight in training. He watches the black-haired girl in awe as she attacks the Orwen knight with a confident smile. Overall, the swordsmen of the second training hall proved that they were definitely stronger, and they lived up to the Zygarde name because they were clearly on par with the kingdom's knights in terms of skill. On the other hand, the trainees from the 6th training hall turned out to be rather disappointing with their skills. Even though they were well trained, they were still inferior in skill compared to the Robert family's knights in training. However, the prince couldn't help but admit that the 6th training hall is still where the most talented trainees were, especially after seeing Martha's brave and epic display of incredible swordsmanship. From a distance, we see the Orwen Kingdom's Duke speaking with the red-haired instructor. He asks Lemmer if this is the reason he came out of nowhere to suggest a visit to the 5th training hall. In response, the elf claims that it's a rare opportunity to be able to duel against one of the 6 Emperor's knights in training, and then reveals that he suggested the matchup because he thought it would teach his students a lesson. The visitor is surprised to hear this statement, and admits that he can't believe those words just came from the person who used to be called the Brilliant Sword. Hearing this, Lemmer just teases him, asking if he should act the way he used to back in the old days. He even suggests that they make a bet, at which the Duke confirms that the elf's betting tendencies are still very much a part of him. Interested in the offer, he asks the elf what the terms of the bet are, so he responds, saying that they should have 20 duels in total, and then reward the winner. Lemmer believes that it would be a lot more fun if they wagered on the duels instead of just watching the matches, but the guard captain finds his suggestions overly confident. He reminds the Duke that his knights were given training in Orwen, so he asks him if he's really sure that his trainees in the training hall can beat them. This question just causes Lemmer to burst into laughter, before telling the visitor that he has way too much faith in his trainees. The elf admits that he too has great faith in his students, implying that he's very sure they can defeat the visitors. The scene shifts back to the fight, where we catch up with Martha, who's still giving Tars a horrible time in their matchup. She lands a powerful sword slash which he manages to block, but the impact is so great that it pushes his feet into the wooden floor. Immediately in the next second, the force of her attack shatters his sword, and as a wave of horror washes over his face, he starts to ask himself how the girl could be so strong. The guy is sweating at this point, because of how terrified he is, but Martha doesn't even care that he's now defenseless. She just follows up with another powerful hit to the gut, which should ordinarily be enough for Tars to start coughing out blood. Even though he's wearing metal armor, the hit is still so strong that it forces him to his knees. As such, Martha is announced as the winner of the honestly one-sided duel. Our boy watches the whole thing feeling dazed, and admits that he thought she would be softer in her swordsmanship after fighting against him. He's completely taken aback by the fact that she has even increased her speed and power instead. After the massive win, Martha sheathes her sword, and with a smug look on her face, she asks her defeated opponent why he would depend on his strength so much when he didn't even put everything into his first attack. This dark-haired girl with no chills even calls him an idiot for making that costly mistake against her. Seeing her confidence and increased strength, Leon admits that he finds it pretty amusing. But Wrath instantly chimes in claiming that there's nothing amusing about watching these little ants fight. The grumpy blue creature claims that all the duels are even boring to him. But our blonde hero just responds, reminding him that not all ants are young. Wrath just scoffs when he hears this, and begins to brag about his exploits back when he was in the demon realm. He claims that back then it was more entertaining to him when he pitched younger demons to fight against each other. However, before he can finish bragging, Leon just smashed him back into vanishing. Our boy is having fun, so he just wants the blue guy to shut it for now. Not long after that, we see that it's time for the next duel between the trainees and the visitors from the Orwen Kingdom. It's the 18th match, and this time, it's between Lunan and another knight in training, named Idalia. Once the announcement is made, Leon prompts Lunan to step forward for her fight, and the white-haired lady timidly walks her way into the arena. Standing face to face with her opponent, we see that the redhead appears to be a lot more confident in the fight. Idalia sees Lunan coming to meet her, and tells her that she doesn't like the spaced-out look in her eyes. Apparently, it annoys her, so her confident demeanor quickly changes into an angry mood as she activates her powers. Huge flames appear all around the redhead, and when Lunan sees this, she quickly retorts that she doesn't like fire either, especially since she has the power of ice. The white-haired knight in training grips her sword tightly and activates her own power as well, which causes cold icy chills to fill the air and surround her. Even though it doesn't show on her face, Lunan immediately assumes a more confident stance in preparation for the duel. And the next thing we see is the two girls clashing swords. Idalia seems to be more ferocious in her attack, while Lunan tries her best to remain focused. As the fight goes on, a huge cloud of steam erupts, and the other trainees just watch anxiously, not sure what's going on. Inside the smoke and mist, the redhead seems to be lost as she can no longer find her opponent, and while she's still standing confused, Lunan sneaks up behind her from within the dust and fog. Idalia instantly senses the sword attack coming from behind her, so she quickly turns around to land a powerful slash of her own. Unfortunately, she misses the shot, and Lunan disappears into the dust once again. At this point, the redhead is even more perplexed, but then she quickly concludes that it must have been an illusion. She's still trying to process the entire thing when the white-haired knight in training sends chills down her spine by placing the cold edge of her sword on the visitor's neck. Idalia is bewildered by this sudden turn of events, and as she stands in that vulnerable position, Lunan is declared the winner of the 18th match. After the announcement, the calculative knight in training starts walking away, so Idalia calls out to her, admitting that it was a good fight even though she lost. But she suddenly stops talking when she sees that Lunan isn't even listening to her. The winner walks straight to Leon to ask him if he watched her fight, like a student seeking for validation. Thankfully, the blonde hero commends her for improving on her footwork and the victory overall. Even though Leon tells her she did a good job, she doesn't seem to be proud of herself. She just sits on the floor like she's the one who lost, and our boy is pretty confused by this. Meanwhile, Lemmer is having a kick out of the results he's seen so far. Since the little tournament started, his students have had 9 wins and 9 losses, which means that they're currently tied with the visitors on the number of wins. So, he jokes about it, suggesting that things are getting pretty heated for the two sides. Regardless, it doesn't make him any less excited to announce that it's time for the 19th round of the day. This time, Burin is called up to face off against the next opponent from Orwin, Saren. The two swordsmen take equally confident stances as they stare each other down before their fight. The visitor introduces himself first, revealing that he's Saren Kaisel, a knight in training. And that's when Burin Zygarde does the same, introducing himself as a trainee. While the two are exchanging pleasantries, Leon takes a closer look at Saren and claims that he looks pretty strong. This worries him, because he feels that Saren is the strongest visitor after the third prince. But while he's getting worked up about it, the fight begins. As you'd expect, the two knights in training engage in a very heated duel. Burin attempts to land a low hit, while Saren opts for an approach from above. Not surprisingly, they cancel each other out over and over, so Burin begins to realize that his opponent is very similar to him in skill. He starts to feel threatened, and fears that it will be over for him if he lets his guard down for even a second. Saren launches at him to land another powerful blow, so the blue-haired swordsman knows that the guy must be thinking the same thing. The two guys are clearly evenly matched, but they're both aware of this, so neither of them holds back. Burin and Saren go at it with all their might, and after a grueling duel, we see that there's no winner this time. Both fighters point their broken swords at each other, and they're panting heavily after such an intense fight. Meanwhile, the other trainees watching are astonished to see that Burin and Saren somehow managed to break their swords. Seeing that this is the result of the 19th duel, the instructor confirms that the match has ended in a tie. After the announcement, a very pissed-off Burin just walks back. Still, Leon commends him for doing a good job, claiming that Saren was the strongest fighter out of all the Orwin knights in training so far. But of course, the grumpy blue-haired guy just storms past him, feeling very disappointed with his own performance. He claims that it doesn't matter how strong Saren was, because he feels that he should have won at all costs, since he went out there to fight with the Zygarde name on the line. However, while he's beating himself up about it, the blonde swordsman just calms him down with a pat on the shoulder, telling him not to worry about it. Burin turns around wondering why he said that, but then our boy suddenly starts walking away, but not before vowing that he'll win the last fight for them. Leon is very certain that he'll defeat the strongest Orwin knight in training, who is none other than the third prince, Grier de Orwin. So, with the determination and zeal to bring glory to his family name, he walks up to face his blue-caped opponent for the 20th round of the very intense tournament. The third prince sees our boy walking up toward him, and he starts to panic because he didn't expect that Leon would be the trainee to fight against him. Using his power, he senses our hero's martial prowess and feels that it's way too ordinary, so he asks Leon if he's even a direct bloodline descendant of the Zygarde family. In response, the hero just bluntly reveals that he isn't, so Grier de Orwin scoffs, because he didn't expect to fight an obvious duel. From the tone of this voice and the look on his face, you can tell that he's underestimating our boy. This snobby prince even claims that he'd prefer to fight someone between Buren, Lunan, and Martha than enter a meaningless duel with Leon. He then calls out to Instructor Lemmer and claims that he has a suggestion for the fight. The red-haired elf asks Grier what he has in mind, so he points to Lunan and Martha, claiming that he doesn't think they're even tired after their own duels. So, he asks the elf if he can fight them after beating Leon. I swear, this guy is overconfident for no reason. After hearing this very bold idea, Lemmer gleefully accepts the proposal, reminding the prince that it's only going to happen if he defeats his current opponent. With the instructor's approval, Grier asks that the girls start getting ready for him right away, because he thinks his fight will be over too quickly. This dude is so confident that he's going to win, that he even decides he won't use his aura against Leon, feeling that he wants to save his power for the girls. After making this decision, he unsheathes his sword, probably thinking that he's just going to casually defeat our boy in a few seconds. Leon hears everything the third prince says, but he doesn't even respond to his insults. Instead, he chooses to do the talking with his sword, so he unsheathes his blade as well. Just as the fight is about to begin, Duke Tartan arrives at the scene, and is horrified when he sees Leon. He asks the instructor who the blonde monster is, and comments that he didn't even notice him before because of his inconspicuous presence. However, now that he sees him, he feels very disturbed by him. Lemmer just responds by saying that the Duke isn't so blind after all, and asks him why he didn't warn the third prince if he knew about Leon's strength. Tartan realizes that Grier thinks the blonde swordsman isn't skilled, and even though he would one day grow up to be the future of the Orwen kingdom, this blue-eyed prince still doesn't know the meaning of defeat. The Duke confesses that he felt it would be a good idea for the prince to learn what it feels like to lose in a safe environment. Regardless, he still feels that Grier is insanely strong, and he's confident that even the genius swordsman won't win against him. Lemmer hears this and finds it amusing, so he just smiles once again, telling Tartan that he doesn't agree. Seeing that they're not on the same page about who would win this insanely hyped duel, the elf suggests that they make another bet. The Duke is taken aback by this and asks Lemmer if he loves to gamble that much. However, the red-haired instructor assures him that it would be a simple bet on a few drinks, so Tartan agrees with him and asks what they're betting on. In response, Lemmer just raises his hand, showing 5 fingers before making a very bold statement, claiming that Leon will end the third prince in just 5 attacks. At this point, it appears that the instructor is even more confident than Grier, who thinks he'll take our boy out very quickly. The fight starts strong, and the red-eyed swordsman charges at the prince with a powerful sword attack. The prince is taken by surprise with this, and his eyes widen in horror as he sees the person he underestimated, lunging at him with a fire tornado at his back. Even the Duke is stunned by this instant attack from Leon, but before he or his champion can even think of a counterattack, the genius swordsman lands his first blow. With great force, speed, and precision, our boy hits Grier in his side, leaving him stunned for a while. The impact is so much that the prince even starts coughing blood, while wincing in pain before falling to his knees as if he's already lost. Seeing this, Leon assumes that the prince is already down, so he concludes that the fight is over and starts to cover his blade back. While he's doing that, Lemmer starts laughing again, feeling that he overestimated the prince by thinking 5 attacks would be needed to knock him down. On the other hand, Duke Tartan just watches the whole thing with shock laced all over his face. The guy can't believe his eyes, and while he remains stunned, the prince starts to reflect on his earlier thinking. He admits that he judged incorrectly, and finally starts to realize that Leon was the last fighter for a reason. Well, of course, it's because he's the real deal, and Grier finally understands this as well. Meanwhile, the Duke tries to start an argument. Tartan finds it hard to believe that Leon is just a trainee, because, in his eyes, the blonde kid already has the footwork and swordsmanship of a trained knight. But Lemmer doesn't give him any room to continue, explaining that it's the exact reason he said that Leon would win. With the way things are looking, the instructor feels that his student has brought home the win already, so he tells the Duke that he'll make reservations at a nice and fancy place where they can have some drinks. But before he can finish talking, Grier interrupts him. The injured prince tells Leon to stop when he tries to walk away. It turns out that he's not done fighting yet, and even when others try to explain that the fight is already over, he insists that he hasn't even shown his real skills. The third prince claims that the fight would have been very different if he had used his real powers at the start of the fight. And while he's being a sore loser, Martha cuts him off, insinuating that he's just a barking dog. She mocks Grier for refusing to admit his defeat, and being so whiny when he's supposed to be a prince. She also uses the opportunity to take a jab at Buren, who's still brooding on the sidelines after his tie against Saren. The prince is shocked to hear her talk to him like that, and he's evidently ashamed of himself. But before he can say another word, Martha just continues talking, and informs him that she's actually trying her best to be nice to him at the moment. And after claiming that she's being polite, she yells at him to get the hell out of their training hall, reminding him that he already lost. After her not-so-subtle goodbye message, Idelia gets offended, and yells at her to watch her mouth when she's talking to the prince. As you'd expect, Martha can't be less threatened by the redhead, so she just informs her that even though Grier is from the royal family, she's also a direct descendant of Sykart. As such, she feels that she doesn't have any reason to be polite to the crybaby prince. Seeing that the atmosphere is getting quite heated, Lemmer decides to intervene. He tells the students that they've all said enough, and suggests that they hear what Leon has to say about the matter, since he's the one that will be fighting in the rematch after all. The elf informs Leon that he can choose what he wants to do, so the young swordsman recalls that bets were placed on the fights. He also confirms that all the duels are over, which means that there is no reason to fight anymore. However, the third prince suddenly acknowledges that he lost. He admits that he didn't properly judge Leon's strength, and reveals that he underestimated him completely before the fight even started. Grier goes on to say that he feels very embarrassed, and that he's so ashamed that he can't raise his chin. As such, he gets on his knee and drops his sword on the ground to beg our hero for one more fight, claiming that he would regret it forever if he leaves with such an embarrassing defeat. The prince then gets on his feet and bows to Leon, pleading with him for a rematch. Seeing this, the blonde swordsman is taken aback, because he didn't expect the boastful prince to even apologize or even put down his sword. He initially felt that Grier was just an arrogant brat, but now that he's seen the guy put his pride aside, he changes his mind and agrees to one last fight between them. The prince assures him that it will indeed be the last one, and as Leon pulls out his sword for the second time, Grier reveals a gold pendant around his neck that has his family's crest imprinted on it. Feeling remorseful, he admits that he lost the first time because he was too arrogant to even recognize his opponent's strength. All of a sudden, he rips the necklace off his body and vows that he'll give his all in this second fight. The moment he does this, a powerful surge of energy surrounds his body, and he literally starts glowing with blue sparks of lightning. Our boy is stunned when he sees the insanely powerful aura coming off the prince's body, and Martha is just as shocked. At last, the prince was showing his true strength. The power seems so overwhelming that Tartan tries to discourage Grier from using the technique, but the prince just cuts him off, insisting that this isn't the time to be hiding his powers. Feeling very confident and driven for the rematch, he unsheathes his sword and makes it very clear to everyone that he wants to fight our hero with everything he's got. While Grier is charging himself up for what he believes will be an epic fight, Wrath reappears to our boy and calls the prince a stupid idiot. Not surprisingly, Leon was also hiding his real powers the first time, but it seems that the prince doesn't know that. Our genius swordsman calmly assures his blue companion that he can beat Grier this time too, but Wrath points out that the opponent has a lot more aura and is also stronger than Leon this time around. Still, feeling confident that he can take the prince out 2 times in a row, Leon asks Wrath if he's willing to make a bet on it. And of course, the hot-headed blue creature accepts the deal. With the both of them on the same page, a blue window appears, revealing the terms of their little wager. Wrath bets that if Leon can win against the third prince of the Orwan Kingdom, then all of his stats will be increased by 4 points. On the other hand, if our boy fails to defeat Grier, Rage Emotion will increase by a whopping 10 points, which means the blue fellow will have a lot more power in Leon's body. The genius swordsman accepts the conditions, and takes a very strong battle stance to activate his aura, waiting for the prince to make his first move. Seeing this, Grier, who already has a point to prove, reveals that he'll start first. So without even wasting another second, he charges at the hero with his powerful aura engulfing him and his sword. The prince leaps into the air to land a powerful attack from above. But as you'd expect, Leon is up to the task, so he delivers a counterattack immediately. The 2 fighters clash swords in a heated aura-infused duel, which causes a huge blast that leaves everyone watching completely astonished. Inside the fight, Grier starts to panic, because even though he's giving everything he's got, Leon doesn't even seem to be affected by it. This makes him wonder if the red-eyed swordsman should even be called a genius, because he feels he's more like a monster. Desperate to win this rematch, the third prince decides to finally use all of the power he's been keeping aside. His sword starts to glow even brighter this time, and when Leon sees this, he concludes that Grier must be using the Pier's sword technique, which is only passed down to the successors of the Orwan Kingdom. Looking at the opponent's energy, it's easy to guess that he's planning to end the duel in a single strike. So of course, our hero braces himself and tells Grier to come at him with everything he's got, while also taking a stance to counter the attack. The prince sees that Leon knows what he's planning to do, so he reveals that he's putting everything on the line with his next move, and then tells the genius swordsman that he should get ready for impact. Looks like an epic clash is about to go down, but the latest chapter unfortunately ends here, leaving us again with an awkward cliffhanger. I'm quite sure that Leon would come out on top in the end, but I'm curious to know how the prince will react to his second defeat in a row. More importantly, how will the patriarch reevaluate his child's worth when he comes to hear about this news?